Welcome back to Media Voices, everybody. We take a look at all the news and the views from the media world, and there's a lot of news around Twitter this week. You might have guessed from the episode title that we're going to be talking about platforms. Now, that's as part of our series of deep dives looking in depth at all the key media moments that have shaped the industry over the past 12 months, and we're bringing in a media expert for each episode. And this week, we're joined by Matt Navarra. So, Matt, why don't you give our listeners a brief explanation of who you are if they don't already know?
Oh, sure. Well, I am a social media consultant and industry analyst. That's what I tell everyone anyway. It's a nice, snappy title. I've been an independent kind of freelance social consultant for the last 3 or 4 years. Before that, I worked for a tech media company called The Next Web, based in Amsterdam. I was responsible for their social as a news publisher and a big event company. And then prior to that, I've spent a good number of years as a digital comms advisor for the British government. Amongst many other jobs. So yeah, that's kind of my snapshot backstory.
But Esther, we are going to be talking about this in our Media Moments 2022 report, aren't we?
We've got to distill this down to 800 words. Yeah, so this chapter, this very snappy chapter, we'll be looking at platforms as part of our annual Media Moments 2022 report. That will be released on November the 30th. That's just a couple of weeks away now. You can pre-register to receive that as soon as it goes live over at voices.media/mm22.
This season and the Media Moments 2022 report would not be possible without the support of our sponsors, Pool with a triple O. Pool's a membership and subscription suite used by leading publishers like Future, Euronews, Elle Magazine France, Harvard Business Review, and a bunch of others from around the world. You can find out more about Pool, P-O-O-L, at pool.tech, and we'll link to them from our show notes as always and on voices.media.
And go to Voices.media to check out our latest Conversations episode, in which I spoke to a team at Reuters all about their upcoming midterms coverage, the packages they're putting together for publishers, and basically everything to do with engendering trust and retaining trust with the public. Now that's, I suppose, going to be pertinent to this discussion as well today, because today we're talking about platforms and the role that they've had in publishers' strategies over the past year. And just for everyone listening, we are going to talk about Twitter. We can't not talk about Twitter. We're always talking about Twitter. So I'm going to edit in a timestamp into the show notes, and I'm going to edit it in now, so you know, if you want to leap ahead to that part of the conversation, you can do that. So that is 28 minutes and 15 seconds into this episode if you want to jump ahead to the Musk chaos. As we said during the recording, everything could and in fact did change before the episode went out. It'll change again before the report goes out, but please do stick with this episode. We tried to provide as accurate a snapshot as we possibly could, even though ultimately that turned out to be a fool's errand.
Okay, I'm going to put the slightly controversial opinion across now that I think what's happening with Twitter, people in the industry care more about than the general public. Meta, I actually think, is a more interesting story this year. Partly because I think the last decade, it's kind of felt a bit like Facebook or Meta, as it's now known, was invincible. It just kept growing and growing. You know, we had advertiser boycotts. We had all sorts of things going. We had Cambridge Analytica scandal. We've had so much news break around Facebook that should have brought it down, and it just continued to steadily grow. Its users grew, its revenue grew. And we were just kind of thinking, like, is this ever not going to grow? This year has shown that it is most definitely not too big to fail. And it's been pretty much from February, it suffered the biggest one-day loss in history for a US company when its shares fell 26.4%, and it wiped about $230 billion off the stock. And that tumble came because it reported its first ever drop in daily user numbers. That's not got any better. We've had July, they reported their first ever drop in revenue, which again, I didn't think would see come in this year. Is this an economic downturn, or has Facebook actually just got as big as it's ever going to get, and it's kind of almost inevitably going to contract now?
Well, I would say that it's just a perfect storm for Meta that's been brewing for some time. I think that the company has rode its luck for many years in terms of its relationship with its users and with the patience of sort of twitchy investors, particularly this year. And it's always had a tempestuous relationship with the media and with news publishers, particularly in that kind of whole debate. I think that it is a factor that the economy has kind of tanked around the world, especially for the impact on big tech companies, because the sort of retreat of ad spend, and being that Twitter, for example, has 89% of its revenue from advertising, and Facebook's is a little bit less dependent, but still pretty high. So I think that does play an impact on it. But also, they've made this big drive towards the metaverse and switching the company name, being the kind of pivotal moment for them doing it. But there is such a gap between now and when that will become a reality that makes it very hard for people to kind of feel confident in what that future might look like. But also conceptually, it's very challenging for both investors and the average user of Facebook and its products to understand what will that even look like. And I think I was listening to Benedict Evans again recently, I highly recommend having a listen to, and he was talking about, you asked people back in the early 2000s about what would a mobile internet look like, and advent of 3G and how people will use it. The ideas of what people would have, completely different from what the actual reality of what it looked like was. And it's very similar now with this kind of AR, VR, metaverse kind of world. What is that going to look like, and how are we actually going to use it? So I think those are big impacts. And I think the impact now in terms of the relationship with Apple and other tech companies as well is also converging on this, and that makes it a challenging environment. And that's something that Apple has done very well to kind of navigate and still come out looking like the good guy. So there are other factors, but for me, those immediately the things that come to mind in terms of where we are with Meta.
Yeah, I remember it was earlier in the year. Every big tech company just started reporting its results, and I was collating them all for the drum, and it just ended up being this litany of missed targets, falling stock prices, apart from a couple of outliers, and it was all predicated on A, slowing user growth, and also B, as you mentioned, that kind of wider economic pressure. But what do we think that drop in daily user numbers is based on? Because ultimately, it seems to me that that's at the heart of everything that we're going to be talking about here in terms of Meta.
It's because all the kids' grandmothers are on Facebook.
Well, I was just going to say, the user growth as an individual platform, like the Blue app, as they call it, the main app, has been on a plateau and sort of tipping over into decline for the last couple of years now. And Instagram equally is kind of starting to tip towards that as well. And all of the documents that came out of the whistleblower leak in the last year also showed their internal research suggests that is what's happening, and that what we already know. Facebook isn't cool, and Instagram is kind of cool, but TikTok's even cooler. So they now are playing this big game of kind of, I think, milking and squeezing every last drop of revenue and opportunity out of those platforms to carry them forwards into the metaverse, which is a long time to squeeze a product for. And I think that that there is also the other factor here that we haven't talked about or mentioned is the fact that TikTok was very smart and very clever with the fact that its algorithm is not like what Facebook has built its whole IP around, which is the social graph. It's now realized TikTok is grown for lots of reasons. It's been very successful, but aside from the fact that it spent billions and continues to spend billions to acquire users, but its algorithm is based on securing content and finding content from a full source of people rather than just your friendships and connections you've opted into to see. And so that's a shift that's going to take some time for Meta to make, and it is sort of attempting that, and it's upsetting some of its Instagram users because of it. But it will get there, and it will be expensive and time consuming, and that's really hampered it. But I think in general that the whole of the Meta kind of suite of apps, including WhatsApp, we'll still see some sort of minor growth for the next couple of years, or at best maybe plateauing probably, and then we'll probably see it sort of go down the other side of the slope. That seems to be the way we're headed.
This actually makes, I completely agree with you, Matt. And I think what you were saying about it kind of feels like this has very much been the end of the social network. Platforms are now so focused on algorithmic recommendations, and it's no longer about joining a platform and connecting with your friends. It's about sort of finding, I don't know, random crap from all corners of the internet. And I get that there's platforms for that, and that's great. If the teens want to sit on TikTok and get all their algorithmic stuff, that's great. But it really, really saddens me that Facebook has made such an attempt to move away from that. And they've had a backlash from that, from a lot of people this year about it, in that, when we originally joined those platforms, we joined them to be connected to our friends. And that they've become increasingly hostile places to socialize with friends. So it kind of, I wish that they'd leaned more into, do you know what? We've got the mums, the dads, the grandmas, who, by the way, have all the money, all the economic wealth locked up, according to all the studies. Let's lean into that. Let's, we can sell that to the advertisers. Instagram's a place where all the kind of, picture influencers are. Let's lean into that for those advertisers. And just leave chasing the under 18s to everybody else, because that's not where the revenue and the value is.
Well, I think the problem with Meta is that they've got a very poor track record in recent years at being innovative, truly innovative in social media platform space, but also it's got a very bad track record at creating anything original that's successful. Because if you look at the sort of history of littered apps that it's kind of thrown out and tried to see if it sticks in the last few years that are being geared towards that younger demographic, they've all pretty much kind of failed very quickly. And the only success that it has been with the Control C, Control V, copy paste kind of behavior of social. But and I think Meta get badly kind of attacked for that but they're all as bad as one another in terms of it. They've all kind of copied and stuff. But I think to your point about the sort of the shift in social media as a concept, as a way of using the internet and engaging and connecting, it has changed and it is changing still. When I'm old enough now to know that what it was like to have a phone line plugged in and get an internet connection for a few hours and then having to get off because my sister was saying she needed to get on the phone to speak to her boyfriend, So now to be on the other side where it kind of fully advanced social media 24/7, it's I've seen it all. We all had this big explosion of, wow, we can share anything we want with anyone we want publicly and people can talk about it and we can connect with these people. And this is amazing, which is how I felt when I first started using the internet in 1997, 98. And then as the 10, 15 years have gone by now, we've kind of had these moments where each kind of year that's gone by up until now, it's been like, actually maybe putting everybody around the world into the same space and thinking they're going to be really friendly and nice to one another when we know that the internet isn't a friendly and nice place a lot of the time. Feed, which was for everybody to kind of do everything on over the last 10 years, has now become the space where it's for sharing news, sharing big things that are kind of not really consequential, low risk, and not really related to you as a person. But that's your feed, and then your private messaging, your groups, your communities, which is where all of the product development's going now with all of these apps and tools and services, is where you have these kind of more deep, meaningful, opinionated perspectives, which are private or ephemeral, and all of the products and features to do with platforms that have been most popular or successful have been to do with that disappearing messages, ephemerality, private spaces, and that's where we are.
I think we're all dancing around it, but we all know that Meta's biggest problem from the past year is that they pissed off the Kardashians.
Of course. Well, you never want to do that.
That was the beginning of the end for Meta. As soon as you lost Kourtney Kardashian, that was always going to be it.
That's my media moment. So.
But as part of this, we've seen as well that Meta has been scaling back some of its products for publishers as a result of everything that Matt was talking about there, but also just because it felt like it was almost going to be more trouble than it was worth to have publishers on side. So, Peter, what have they shuttered this year, or what have they announced that they're shuttering?
Newsletters is gone. Is it called? Bundles? Bulletins?
Bulletin, yeah.
That's gone. And it's scaling right back on news partnerships. There's some deals still in place, but they'll just run them down. There was an Esther that was saying that the humans had been removed from the news tab.
Again, yeah.
The problem was she couldn't find the news tab.
But this is not a one and done thing. The kind of the reinsertion of the human into the curation across social has gone back and forth for years and years and years.
They're just pulling back. I mean, they've ditched instant articles, which I don't think anyone was particularly brokenhearted about. I didn't see
anybody mourning it at all.
So yeah, they've kind of proved that they don't care. They've just proved what we knew already. They don't care.
I don't think they've really ever genuinely cared for or wanted to be involved in the news business. It's just a byproduct of the way that their product is and what people need to do on it or tend to do on it. In terms of, they've said repeatedly that from a revenue point of view or from a, the percentage of content that's shared as links in newsfeed and any of its products. It's a very small percentage. And I think some people have always been suspicious, or some people have anyway, about whether they're just playing it down in some sort of negotiatory kind of way because they don't want people to see that they need it. But I don't think they do need it. And the fact that they have constantly chopped and changed, I think the reason they've done chopped and change is because they have had to kind of appease regulators. They've had to deal with, the newspaper industry, the publishing industry, kind of battling to kind of save their kind of businesses because they haven't been able to manage effectively, change in their own industry. And they've become very reliant, or they were for a while, very reliant on these platforms as a source of traffic and a way of reaching different audiences. But now, you're right. In the last couple of weeks, there's been the news tab, which is a fairly recent addition to Facebook as a separate tab in that way, is now going to be going back to an AI kind of decided kind of content in there, no human real interaction in there from someone in Facebook, which was outsourced anyway to another company. I think if we hadn't seen the downturn, in such a big downturn as we have, and such a desire for investment in Meta's metaverse plans, then I think this would have happened eventually, but it would have happened at a slower pace because a lot of it seemed experimental anyway. Newsletters was very experimental for them, and audio was experimental for all of the social platforms. And so we've just seen an acceleration of that to cut costs. But yeah, it was. I remember having a very tense relationship when I was in a news publisher with Meta for a good 5 years.
You surprised me with that.
Yeah.
What's interesting, I think, is that for the longest time, the left hand didn't seem to know what the right hand was doing in terms of Meta. So it had people who I genuinely felt were doing their best to cater for publishers, but then it just butted up against this wider business operation, and it just never seemed to work.
I wonder, going back to what Esther said about the social aspect, I wonder how much of that's a tension between its roots as a social network and the reality of it as a content distribution network.
Many news publishers in the last decade, Facebook and its other products have been, fairly big, hefty part of their way of finding new audiences and reaching audiences. But that's kind of dwindled over time as they changed their algorithm and as they've kind of had sort of up and down kind of relations with different governments around the world in terms of links and news coverage and news content. But recently we've seen a similar kind of back and forth or similar dependency and worrying kind of relationship in terms of small businesses. We went through this period with the pandemic where all these small businesses became very in need of support and help from these platforms to be able to kind of survive in a world where it's all online. And that dependency, I was watching it sort of play out, thinking this is just, again, companies should really be very careful to be reliant on these platforms as a small business beyond what you need to. And we can see with that combined with the creator economy growth, which is another huge buzzword of the last 2 years, really, that if a platform like Instagram goes down, which it did in the last week, it isn't just a bit annoying and somewhere where we just all head to Twitter and talk about the fact that Instagram's gone down. It's also, people can't do branded content deals. They can't do their live videos, which is for their sole income for some people who are really focused on one specific platform as a creator. So again, the dependency of these platforms is still quite problematic, and I don't think that's going to change in the short term. But I think as we move through this evolution of social, it will become less of an importance for people.
I am really going to miss that actually about Twitter, is going there to complain that other networks are down. But Esther, before we get onto this, we do want to acknowledge that we're going to be talking around the metaverse, Web3 in general in an upcoming episode.
It's just the sheer scale of it. I mean, in some ways, we could be talking about this in 5 years as wasn't this amazing foresight to sink all this money and then they were well ahead when this all sort of exploded.
No chance.
I hope it's not, because I don't want to be spending my days in a VR headset. But so literally a week or two ago, Meta, they released their latest earnings report, and their shares tumbled 24% to their lowest level in nearly 4 years, following what was called a train wreck earnings report. They revealed that the first 9 months of this year, they'd lost $9.4 billion on their metaverse unit, Reality Labs. And they were basically like, we're going to expect this to continue, like significantly wider operating losses next year. They've kind of not really got a path out of that. They're just hoping that they're going to be the first to build this kind of virtual future. But a lot of the stuff that's been demoed has been really panned because it's, I mean, Chris, you're way more into this kind of virtual VR
because
world than I am.
It's crap.
A lot of it's been panned as like, this is really amateurish compared to some of the companies that have been in this space for like 5, 6, 7 years.
Some of it is absolute pants. And I mean, well,
except it's not because we don't have legs.
Well, exactly.
Well, I was going to say, they added legs. That was the big revelation, wasn't it?
No, they didn't.
Was that just a fake?
That was faked. They mocapped somebody and then they added that in, which is ridiculous. But
this is why I don't pay attention to this crap.
But here's the thing. I used my Oculus earlier today. And during the pandemic, I have been experimenting with it, using it the pass-through as a sort of virtual work environment. It's not there yet. And Meta's, I think, mistake is focusing on it from a business perspective. What they should have done is spend a few more years building up the entertainment side of it, making it a viable entertainment product, and then sort of brought in some of these commercial activities as well. Because as a piece of like tech, is a totally unbelievable piece of kit. It is fantastic. It's not perfect, but it is the source of some of the best entertainment that I've had in years and years and years. The problem is they've tried to yoke it to what was previously Facebook's bread and butter, which was advertising, which was a lot of commercial models that simply don't suit it yet. And so we've seen some absolutely shite brand extensions into what people think of the metaverse.
I think they have very little choice but to focus on enterprise, because the people that are going to be able to afford to spend some budget on it are going to be enterprises, and they will be able to help them figure out what works and what doesn't work whilst they sort of go through this sort of phase, but also sort of help fund it a little bit. But I don't think it's even about that. They're not going to make huge amounts of money from any of this stuff. So I think the enterprise is a route to kind of to a bigger goal. I think that I think whatever it is we're seeing in metaverse, or people when they talk about metaverse now, and for most people they assume that means VR and AR, which will be a big component part of it, I suspect. But again, what we imagine it will be like and how it will actually turn out, I think will be very different. I think we will laugh about our concepts of what we thought the metaverse would be.
But we should rattle through TikTok actually at this point, because we've mentioned it before. It is the fastest growing social network. It is expected to reach 1.8 billion users by the end of this year. It's also been singled out as one of the biggest sources for mis and disinformation. And Esther, I believe you actually brought this up on the last episode we spoke about trust.
Yeah, about younger people being quite vulnerable to that misinformation. I mean, the US midterms have just happened, so we'll see what impact, because no doubt there'll be studies on it. But yeah, I still maintain that's a ticking time bomb.
But in terms of a platform itself, we've obviously seen Meta launch a smear campaign against it, which was totally bizarre. And it is, from a publisher and from an advertiser perspective, the place to be, because they are launching new advertising products all the time, self-serve stuff. The ability to talk to people, authentic is their big word. But for the most part, it seems to be watch this space. We need to know what it's going to look like next year before we can start planning for sort of what publishers can do. How many publishers do we see on there? I know people have put some lists together already.
There are a large number now. If you look to the beginning of the year and compare it to now, that number has fairly rapidly escalated. And there are a couple of lists I shared one recently. It's very good and worth looking at. But I think that news publishers that are leaning into individual characters and presenters and personalities and realize that people want to be entertained as much as they want to be informed, and they're scrolling through content that mostly on TikTok is not news. It's about kind of people doing different challenges and funny things that have gone viral and all sorts of other clips. And just to sort of jump from that to a serious news piece is doesn't often work. So I think that's where the skill is, and the publishers that are doing particularly well, like Washington Post is very good at doing it. BBC's been late to it, but the quality is very good there from them. And I think it tends to be some of the younger orientated news publishers in terms of that, and the ones that are familiar with that sort of audience are unsurprisingly very effective on TikTok.
Is that not a bit terrifying? I know we were talking a bit about this last week, of this sort of conflation of news and entertainment, but and it ends up being a catch-22. If publishers don't join TikTok, you're left with all the TikTok influencers who, when things like the Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial went on, they suddenly realised that if they all commented on that and all gave their opinion on that, their views sort of quadrupled. But then you've just got the thing that, I don't know. I feel like TikTok's just, because it's not quite as polished which in a way is, I suppose, is good for the users. But people go there not expecting the 10 o'clock news clip. They're not there seeking out the news. When the news then comes to them, like it's such a different proposition. I just think it's really scary that people are consuming news like that.
I think that people are far more likely and more interested in the individual reporters and journalists on TikTok than they are the actual news brand's account. That they will follow that account as a kind of almost as a given. But I think it's far more important and interesting to them to follow the people who are making the news and creating the news. And I think that the other shift that we've noticed, which is quite heavily sort of skews on TikTok, is that people get news not just from news journalists, and that's also a risk in the sense that there's influencers and creators and people that are not trying to pretend that they are journalists or whatever, but also feeding the news and creating the news, and that's partly stems from this explosion in creators and being able to make an audience, create and find their audience and create a living out of it. But also that there's a huge level of distrust and skepticism in younger generations with mainstream news broadcasters and sort of traditional methods and sources of news. And so the interest in people that are not from the BBC or Sky News or whatever doesn't surprise me. And the people that are more edgy and more just like you're watching one of the creators or influencers that you love on TikTok, that style of delivery and that way of engaging with your audience is very effective. And that if you look at the journalists and reporters that are successful on TikTok, they kind of fit that, they fit into that very, very well. That the line defining them as a journalist versus a creator or an influencer is very, very fuzzy.
It's not why it's important, though, exactly, that people like the Washington Post or BBC or Sky, whoever it is, actually gets on the platform and provides a different voice.
It's difficult for publishers because they're not going to stop the march of this shift towards news influencers, and people like I speak about people like Taylor Lorenz is a good example. Previously New York Times, now Washington Post, built up a really good following and audience who are fascinated with her really interesting, engaging, culturally relevant pieces of news and content, and they are not so fussed about whether Taylor is New York Times or Washington Post. That's kind of like a good springboard into sort of authority for Taylor. But actually,
B-Reel's coming around that circle
as a personality and her delivery style and the way that she builds a kind of a following around her. And for news publishers, that's very threatening and understandably so, because who owns that audience and where will that audience go when one person who's built up a significant following goes elsewhere. So it is a challenge, but I think that's why these different models of news publishers that are coming up, like Semaphore is a good example recently, and others, where there's this kind of relationship between kind of like the interest in the brand is as much about the individual news personalities than it is about the news organization that sits behind it. But of course, these reporters and journalists up until now have relied upon these big brands to carry them, give them a career, and also supply the news gathering tech to do their jobs. But that's changing. The ability to film and record stuff, the ability to edit stuff, the ability to get stuff from news wires and to do research and all the things that you would normally need the kind of investment from a news publisher. You can set yourself up if you're a seasoned veteran in the news gathering business and have a bit of personality and do a lot of it yourself. So yeah, there's more power and more control over that relationship with creators and with journalists than there's ever been, and I think that's frightening for many publishers.
Yeah, 100%. Now listen, I'm very proud of us that we haven't yet spoken about Twitter. I feel like we've done incredibly well to have lasted this long without talking about the absolute mania that has been the period since February on Twitter. Very early on in the year, Elon Musk started making overtures that he was going to buy Twitter. He went through a period of, like I said, manic behavior. That's very unusual for the man. And went back and forth with Twitter. There were talks of lawsuits. In fact, I believe there was a lawsuit at one point to force him to go through with this purchase at a price that he had mooted in the first place. And ultimately, as of the time of this recording, he's been in position as chief twit for coming up on 2 weeks now. And everything has been absolutely crazy ever since. Where do we think we are at the moment? And I don't know which one of you wants to take that, because I certainly don't.
Media Voices got out of Twitter shares positively.
Well,
so we ended up with about a $70 profit.
Oof.
So that little experiment eventually worked in our favor.
Actually, we should probably mention this, though. We don't know. At the time of recording, things will have changed by the time that we actually put this episode live, and things will have changed by the time we put the report out. So what, Matt, from your perspective then, if you could provide a little bit of structure?
I've got about as much insight and clarity around the mind of Elon Musk and his aspirations for Twitter than anyone else has got. He's a law to himself. I think that, I've done in the last few weeks probably a dozen interviews, and I kind of had the same sort of stance on it, really, that, Twitter is now the Elon Musk show, and he is the main character and will continue to be so. And whilst it keeps his attention and interest, and while it's fun and it's providing him with whatever form of kind of entertainment or inner satisfaction, this sort of craziness will continue. I think the craziness won't stop until the business goes under, or he loses interest in it, and or decides to kind of, like, I've done it now, I'm going to stick someone else in charge who can figure out the mess I've left behind. I think that he doesn't have a Scooby-Doo as to how to run a social network. His business success is clearly from engineering, technical types of businesses, and his own ability to relate to other people and understand the psychology of other people and engage with people in a way that's kind of not kind of a bit odd or quirky is limited. And so to put someone like that with a lot of money and also has a lot of fun playing on Twitter, I think, it's got a recipe for disaster. I think that in terms of the product at the moment, I think we're only at the very start of the journey of Twitter becoming a very wild place. And Twitter was already extremely wild. And it's, someone wrote recently, I think, saying how Twitter is a platform that people hate to use and they hate everybody on it. That's basically everybody hates everything. And it's just a place to tell everybody about that hate. But for news publishers, circling back to, it's quite, and journalists, it's a significant moment, because it has famously been the go-to kind of platform for breaking news, for finding out what's going on in the world, for journalists to reach out to sources for information, and for news platforms to distribute their content and build audiences around. And so for them, this is not fun at all. And for advertisers, I think it's the opposite of that. I think they don't give a shit, because, and as you mentioned at the top of this podcast, their spend on Twitter is a rounding error for most of them, and they do not it would not take them very much effort to go, do you know what, let's just put that 5%, 7%, 3% of our total ad spend budget away from Twitter and just add it onto the TikTok experimental budget. That it's not going to make any difference to them. So he is in a very weak position to be negotiating with them. And the idea that this week, I think he was saying that he's going to name and shame the advertisers who don't support free speech by supporting the platform, or whatever junk he was spouting. Yeah, and the list goes on. But hey, my account's taken an uptick because I'm just talking about all this all the time. So I'm winning in the short term.
You're laughing.
Only days till he bans my account. He's already blocked it, but he hasn't banned me yet. So we'll see what happens.
Do you know what this reminds me a bit of? It's almost the same as when Donald Trump came into power. You've got this put in air quotes successful. You've got this very successful businessman who comes and runs something that he actually doesn't really have any experience or idea knowing how to run, and it's just chaos. Like every single day is a new form of utterly indescribable chaos. Like the fact that he fired thousands of people on Friday, and then before the weekend was up, he was getting managers to phone people to ask them to come back because the site couldn't run and he couldn't build half the stuff he wanted to build for it. And the fact he's polling people about what features he wants to build, and he was going back and being like, oh, So if you weren't paid $20 for verification, would you pay $8? Like, this isn't a marketplace to haggle in.
Yeah, Stephen King does all a big favor there, but which is not a sentence I thought I'd ever say. But his thing is moving so fast. The thing is, that Trump analogy is very, very apt because that chaos has actually put a lot of advertisers off. Matt mentioned 89% of Twitter's revenue comes from advertising. We've seen General Motors pause advertising. We've seen Mondelez pause advertising. We saw reports that Nintendo, a bunch of other big spenders on Twitter, were pausing advertising. And it's all due to that cult of personality and the chaos that has ensued as a result. But what we should probably talk about here is what this means for publishers, particularly around verification, particularly about what it means for disinformation in the run-up to the US midterms, which is seen as a proof point. Do we think that Elon Musk has a Scoobies about what impact this is all going to have on dis and misinformation, and as a result of that, what it's going to have on Twitter's bottom line?
I think the obvious answer you might think is that he hasn't got a clue, but I actually think he does have a clue. I think the thing is that he doesn't give a shit because why does he need to give a shit? Because the only thing that he should be worried about, you'd think, is to make sure that he doesn't have a problem with debt with the company, and he kind of recovers that to some degree, which you would arguably say, well, then he needs to give a shit a bit, and to some degree he does. But I think he's got people around him that are telling him all sorts of kind of things in his kind of, I think someone defined them as the brain trust, which is a great term. His team around him are just telling him what to do and how to do it. But he's got people like in charge of head of safety who's been there for a long time, who's tweeting about what they're doing in this space for misinformation and parody accounts and verification and stuff. So it's not like he's sitting there and it needs someone to shake him. Hey, did you realize what you're doing? He knows that, and he's making a conscious decision that what he's deciding to do is the best thing for the platform. I don't think we'll ever fully understand why he views it that way against all of this kind of evidence and the examples of stuff that's gone on in the short term recently. That stuff with his account, as soon as he said about verification and paying for verification and anyone being able to buy it, I was speaking to someone a couple of weeks ago and I was saying, within hours, people are going to create Elon Musk accounts, or they're going to change their name to Elon Musk, and they're going to make themselves. And then he suddenly, obviously, figured that out. That's what's going to happen, and changed the rules. And like someone tweeted the other day saying, and this tweet's great, it was from yesterday. Everything happening on Twitter now is a lot easier to understand if you ever had a younger sibling that invented a game and added a new rule every time they started losing. That and another one was, and every Elon post is like watching Joe Pesci enter the Home Alone house. My definition of it at the moment is that Twitter and Elon Musk's Twitter is the new Fire Festival, basically, and the TikTok, the Twitter Blue with the verification is the cheese sandwich that brings it down.
My favorite one of those was, this is very easy to understand if you understand that we're looking at a midlife crisis, but from the perspective of the sports car. Which I think is just the most apt analogy I've ever heard.
In my mind, I'm sort of like thinking about what's going on at the headquarters of Twitter, and I just view it as Michael Scott's paper company in the American office, and them kind of just figuring it out as they go along and not knowing what to do next. But
do you think it's possible that he just isn't that bright?
Yeah, I mean, he's not. I think he's Dunning-Kruger, isn't he? He's very bright in some areas, but he's not bright enough to know that he is not suitable for this. I mean, we're basically seeing him recreating verification in social media from the beginning. I would be surprised if we didn't actually end up with something similar to the system that they eventually settled on.
I think he is a smart guy, but I think that he doesn't understand humans very well, which is a bit worrying when you're in a social network. And I don't think that he gives a shit about enough things that he should give a shit about, because he's not going to care that everyone around the world is kicking off and going nuts and saying you're crazy. He will be thriving and reveling in being the star attraction on the platform. And to go back to the point about being Trump-like, I think that reference and that kind of that observation has been made quite widely, particularly in the last few days, with the language in his tweets where he's talked about kind of like what everyone should be doing and how they're not, seeing it the way he's seeing it and things. He comes across very much like Trump, and that's the other thing. I think we are still on a countdown to the big arrival of Trump, and I think that will happen, but I don't know when. But it's coming, and that, can you imagine both of them on the platform at the same time?
No, I don't want to imagine.
I suppose the question that we don't know the answer to is the fact that he spent $44 billion on buying the platform going to force him to grow up a bit quicker over it? And if he's not the right person to actually figure out some of the knottier issues, is he at that point going to have to put somebody else in charge? I mean, that could happen before the end of the year. Who knows?
That could happen before the end of this recording.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know where we're going to end up with this one. This story of Twitter, I think it's definitely we're at the beginning rather than the middle or end of the drama of the Twitter takeover. And I think that the impact of the decisions that Elon has already made and will probably continue to make, some of them will take some time to kind of really fester and then kind of mutate and start to be dangerous and toxic to the platform. But other decisions we'll see very quickly. It will make quite a significant change to the platform. And I think that the thing that's going to happen very quickly, as we've already seen, is advertisers will pull back. Users will the mood and the vibe and the kind of troll-like activity, I think, will increase as people test the boundaries. And I think that we'll see a rise upwards of Twitter in terms of usage and engagement, which will be used, as he already is, as hey, look, what I'm doing is working. There's lots more people downloading Twitter and using it and engaging. But that will just be because it's the Trump effect. It's the crazy person that's screaming loudest who's doing crazy things. It's like watching a car crash. You kind of want to watch it, but you don't want to.
I was just about to say, it's like watching a warehouse burn down. Sure, there's a big audience, there's a big crowd, but you're not watching it for any positive reasons.
I mean, we talked about this before, that Twitter as a public utility is a really, really positive idea. Yeah. So if it was paying to take it out of that, not Elon Musk particularly, just out of private ownership, I think there's something in that. I definitely don't think verification is the point. I think maybe the ability to go right back to what Matt said at the beginning, the ability to have closed groups like they've got with, what do they call it? The community stuff that they've got.
I think we're looking at it through the wrong direction. I think it's what would Twitter have to pay me to stay using it, because and that as much as it's funny at the same time, it's genuine. As a content creator, I have choices to go in any number of places to get an audience and to engage with people and to create content for. And they should be thinking, and I know that Elon Musk, in fairness to him, has mentioned that seeing that as being a critical part of evolving Twitter and making it work. But yeah, I've always wanted Twitter to find a way to make money for me, because all the other platforms I have smaller audiences on, I've made more money on than Twitter, which is the account and the platform that I've got the biggest audience, which is completely the wrong way around.
Honestly, we could have spoken about that alone for another 4 hours, because we haven't even mentioned sort of reputed rise in hate speech and the pushback against those stats. We haven't mentioned the idea about what verification is going to, or that new system of verification is going to do for brands on their news brands. We really haven't even scratched the surface. And like we said, it's going to probably have turned on its head by the time we finish this recording, at least. So, Matt, thank you so much for coming on and having this chat all about platforms. If the listeners want to find you, I don't know if you want to give your Twitter or if you want to give...
Well, I was just going to say, I would say find me on Twitter as @Matt Navarra, but if you don't find that, then if you pretty much go on Google and search Matt Navarra or Matt Navarra Geek Out, you will find that and my newsletter, and it's all there. But thank you for having me.
You are very welcome. And thank you to Membership and Subscription Suite Pool for sponsoring this season of the Media Voices podcast and the upcoming Media Moments 2022. If you'd like to learn more about the topics like optimizing subscription conversion rates, they've got a bunch of helpful resources at blog.pool.tech. That is POOL. And don't forget, you can pre-register to download the Media Moments 2022 report by going to voices.media/MM22. But for now, thank you for sticking with us throughout the chaos. Please do continue to follow us on Twitter for now. But for now, thank you so much for listening, and goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.